Yes.
Right, that should do it. Running now.
Yeah.
Hey, Ms. Woodruff, we're now running the camera, so everything you say now will be recorded. So I'm going to start off by asking you, just tell me the story of how you first met Francoise.
Well, I first read that book when I was about 14, and I thought it was the most beautiful book I'd ever read in my life. And then many years...
I don't like this at all.
Oh, she said...
Okay, I will stop you there one more time. Now, I'm sorry about this. This is making films. We've had to take one, take two. And this time, we won't stop you. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning.
Go back to the
beginning. Do you mind?
No.
I won't stop you again.
No. I first read the book, as long as my voice flew, in 1914, no, in 1919, while we were still in Switzerland. And then I never thought of it again until one day, shortly before the war, I saw it again in the house of these friends, and I commented on it, and my hostess said, oh yes, we were so sorry for the poor little authoress when we were living in London, because we saw her in Westminster Cathedral most days, and she was always starving, and we had to feed her. And I said, well, I'd like to meet her. I'm very interested in the whole thing. So they threw us together, and we made fast friends. And she was more or less sane in those days. She was very, very poor. She lived in 2 rooms at 34 Park Hill Road, Hampstead, yes, next door to the Dominicans. And she used to pray there a great deal and drive them mad by falling in front of their stores and praying as though to them. And I don't think they were very kind to her. But anyhow, when I met her, she used to come. I used to have her to lunch, and we were living in Edgware Road, and she was living at Park Hill Road, Hampstead. And she always walked all the way. She never had any money for fares. But at the very beginning, she had a very nice, beautifully made cloak. And this was supposed to have been given her by Granny Duchartre when she stayed with her. And it was a sort of a really good garment. But I have no evidence that she ever did really stay with the Duchesse de Chartres. Well, then I don't know why, because between the time when Elizabeth Iddesleigh used to be there, because I think before she married, she and Susan were the daughters of Mrs. Belloc Lowndes. And Mrs. Belloc Lowndes was a great socialite, to put it mildly, and very amusing. And I discovered from Francoise that she knew Elizabeth Iddesleigh, and I inquired from Elizabeth as much as I could. And I had her to stay with us where we lived in Berkshire at the time of the coronation, because I was afraid that, or they were all afraid, that she might make scenes. And every day she wrote to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and she'd give the letters like that to the postman, who was very surprised, I think. And they would always love letters, and how she was being persecuted by Mrs. Simpson for political reasons.
Can you tell me about Lady Iddesleigh going to the Home Office and file?
Oh yes, so Lady Iddesleigh went to see Sir John Simon. There was this colossal file, and it was full of these letters that she wrote to the Queen. And at one time she told me that she and her mother, and she would never tell me who her mother was, and the Queen made their baby clothes together. All that was complete fantasy. And so it was difficult to know what was fantasy and what wasn't.
Can you just tell me that again, but mention the Home Office?
The Home Office had a great file about her, saying that she'd written these letters to the royal family and to the police, and they said, well, what should we do about the coronation? Because she might make trouble. So through Elizabeth Iddesleigh, I said I'd have her to stay, which I did. And I tried to make it all as painless as possible. And at the time that it happened, we were discussing coats of arms and things. And this is one of the things I thought you'd be amused by. And she talked about the fleur-de-lis. As I said, the beautiful French emblem. Oh, she said, my family had that long before the fleur-de-lis. It was bullfrogs in the days of ancient Egypt. And you could see the resemblance. You know, the beginning of a bullfrog turning into a fleur-de-lis. That was the kind of thing she could tell one, when she wouldn't have learned that on a lumber camp in Oregon.
When she came here, what did she talk about with you?
Chiefly the Prince of Wales, I think. People she'd known, French history, a little about yes, the people on the lumber camp. We talk about the animals a bit, particularly about Peter Paul Rubens, the pig.
So she talked about her diary?
Oh, yes. She told me how she had to steal paper bags and things because a person called the Mama, who was very nasty and was Mrs. Whiteley, didn't want her to do this. Called her Opal because she'd had a child called Ruby, who I think didn't live. And she said she had to take these paper bags into the wood and places and write as best she could. What interests me in the book is that it's thought in French. The terms are someone who didn't know English very well, and she thought out what she was writing in French and then translated it. She may have known she did that, but I've always analyzed it and found that to be the case.
What's your own belief about the truth of her story?
It's very difficult to say exactly what I believe. I believe that she was born in Europe. I don't know who her parents were, and she talked about some foster parents, but she also talked about Aunt Anna, the sister of Pope Pius the IX, and she said she'd looked after her for a bit. Well, that's the sort of thing, you know, that you didn't know what it meant.
What do you know about her relationship with Lord Grey?
Well, that was before my day, but he took her up in a big way, and she used to be there for house parties. And one fine day they were out in the garden, and a hare ran across the road and was being chased by a dog, which got it. And she picked up the hare, which was wounded but not dead, and for days she wore it round her neck like a fur. So she had this sort of curious effect on animals, I suppose. Though I never saw it later on when she stayed with me and I had cats and dogs.
How did she get introduced to society? What sort of society did she move amongst?
I think Lord Grey. He was so excited about the book that he cultivated her and brought her over, and she met all these rather upmarket people. But what happened by the time I knew her, which was about 1937 or so, I think, she was poor and hungry and living in those two dirty rooms in Hampstead. But she loved coming. We made great friends. But she got poorer and poorer. I don't know what kind of public assistance there was for people like her in those days. She depended a lot on charity. There were one or two people who gave her things. And various people made friends with her. There was a rather well-known actress called Doris Keane who had met her and couldn't believe half the story, but knew that there was a story.
What was it that she had which charmed people so clearly?
She was very attractive in a way, childish, if you like. She talked well. She wasn't amusing, but she was interesting. And every now and then she'd say something rather original, like the bullfrogs. But when I had her to stay at the beginning of the war, she was always pretty rum by then. And I hadn't room in our house. And I had a very nice sort of summer house, just outside. And I put her in there, and then she came over for baths and meals and everything. But she hated it. She only wanted to get back to London, in spite of the bombing. And one day, when she had gone up for the day, I went into that little summer house and looked at a little box of papers, and it was just scraps of paper with David, 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 David written all over them. And she always had this obsession of being in love with somebody. And I think a lot of her trouble was due to lack of love. Nobody loved her. People were interested in her and kind to her. And so then, when David passed out of it, she began inventing all sorts of other people she was in love with. One of them was Averell Harriman, who was an American politician who came over during the war. And she went and rang the bell at the American embassy looking for him. So she was convinced, when she had these obsessions, that she had somehow or other had a connection with somebody. But most of it was fantasy, as far as I know.
How was she dressed, and how did she speak when she came to you?
She spoke with a slight American accent always.
What were her clothes like?
Her clothes became worse and worse, and I supplied a great many of them.
I think you told me when I last saw you that she had quite a lot of good clothes one time.
Well, she had this lovely cloak, which was supposed to have been the produce of Granny Chartres. But whether it was or not, I don't know. But she could never... You see, before she came to England, she had had this extraordinary outing, which I think Elizabeth Lawrence describes, of going to India. I don't know how she got to India, but she was treated as sort of royal and had a procession with Maharajas through the streets and whatever. I think that's all in Elizabeth's book.
Did she ever tell you herself any of her stories about India?
Very little, except about a Swami, who was one of these people she fell in love with, I think. But what she liked about it was that she went to the French consul in Madras, I think, and there she told him she'd lost her passport, and he issued her a French travel document, for a French one, and what she really wanted was to be French and to have a French document. She didn't call herself Francoise D'Orleans, but she called herself Mademoiselle D'Orleans, D-O-R-L-E.
I'll just stop you there. Just stop the camera a second.
Which had all these broken up bits of paper bag in them. And there was also a sort of red or French flag, you know, tricolor, sort of a big ribbon. Not just a little thing, but a huge thing. And a passport, or it wasn't a real passport, it was signed by the consul saying, this lady tells me she has lost her passport. And on her, for what she tells me, I issue this French travel document, of which she was inordinately proud because she thought that stopped her having to be Opal Whiteley. Well, of course, I know she never was. I don't know who she was, but I know she wasn't Opal Whiteley.
Can you just change frames, actually? Just tell me again how she went to the consul in Madras.
Well, that was the story. I suppose she must have told me some of it herself, but I saw these documents in the tin trunk that she had gone to the consul in Madras saying she had lost her passport, didn't tell him it was an American passport, and he gave her a French travel document.
Okay, that's fine.
And that set her up no end.
That's fascinating. That's something I needed to know. I didn't help and wondered how they came by that.
I imagine that this was before my day. On the strength of that, I think she must have come to England at the behest of Lord Grey. But she is supposed to have had a sunstroke while she was in India. And I think that was the beginning of her mental breakdown, followed by the marriage of the Prince of Wales to Mrs. Simpson, which really, I think, finished her off in a way. I used to get letters from her saying, when she was in the hospital, sort of 5,000 prostitutes have been released, 3,000 agents, but I am still here because I am a political prisoner.
Mm. Did you visit her in Hampstead?
At Hampstead? Oh, yeah, I did, but I visited her more in hospital. when she was taken away by the authorities, because she would run out into the street in the middle of the night screaming for the Swami, they took her away. And she gave my name to the authorities. And so I went to those rooms with the man from the LCC, as it then was, while we packed up the stuff and took it to the LCC storeroom. And for some time I helped to pay for the storage. But they took it on themselves. They were very good, the local authority. Very, very good and nice. And they kept all these things in a warehouse in Wapping called Farthing Hall. And they were all carefully covered up. They were the possessions of people like her who had had to go into mental hospitals, and this was where their possessions were kept. And I was always impressed by how decently the whole thing was done. Anyway, the time passed, and of course the McBride became the official solicitor, and he dealt with all her affairs. And every time I saw her in hospital, she'd say, "What about my books? What about my things?" And I'd say, "They're all right, don't worry about them." Which was true, because I think they were all safely stored. She had an enormous number of books. She had a bill at Sotheby's, though she had no money. And a lot of these books we had to sort out and return. She hadn't paid for them. She used to go to the local pub and buy gin boxes for a penny each and turn them into bookshelves. It was very ingenious. And she had this great collection of books, largely about European royal families. And she had photographs of Franz Josef and Habsburgs and so on. But I used to take her for long motor drives, because I've always had the theory that if you want people to talk, you take them for a motor drive, and they get relaxed, and you ask them a question or two, and you get good answers. And I never even so found out exactly who her mother was, I mean who was supposed to be, until in the middle of the war, when I was in the Red Cross, she came and asked me if I could get news of her maman. And I said, yes, well, I'd have to have her name and address. And it was this Archduchess, I forgot, Marguerite was she called? Marie Marguerite, a spinster living with two sisters in a castle on the Danube. And I got through the Red Cross inquiry. They had a thing for checking on people in enemy countries. And they got a message to say she was fine and all right. That was the only time I ever got any kind of clue as to who her mother was supposed to be.
Did you not tell me about, maybe it was one of the Belloc Lowndes, going to the Spanish Civil War and coming across a member of the French royal family?
No, I saw her there during the Spanish Civil War, yes.
Can you tell me the story then?
Well, my husband and I were there on a journalist outing, and we went to one of the military hospitals. And there into the room came a young woman, looked exactly like Francoise. I said to my husband then, it's Francoise.
And can you tell me where that was?
I can't remember.
And who it was?
It was some little Austrian archduchess. It might have been at Vittoria or someone like that. I really don't remember.
I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, just tell me the story again, saying that we went to Spain during the Civil War.
We went to Spain as journalists during the Civil War, on Franco's side. And we visited hospitals and places, and in one of them, into the room, came a little Austrian archduchess who was nursing there. And I said to my husband then, Francoise. The resemblance was very remarkable.
Can you describe for me what her flat was like in Hampstead?
I will if you want me to. It was absolutely filthy. She obviously avoided using the plumbing, and there were flower vases, and it was quite filthy. And the man said, you know, that it was very unfair that they had to come and dismantle this house of property without having special clothes. While I was there, I stole a little. She had some sort of little boxes with relics of saints in them. And there was one of St. Louis, King of France. So I stole those. I didn't see why they should go into a LCC warehouse. And what else did I steal? 1 or 2 copies of the book, I think. Nothing else.
She still had copies of the original diary?
Yes, she had several. And the first one I had a sort of soft leather binding. I don't know if it's in this room to this day. I had several copies, and then, of course, I had Elizabeth Lawrence's book, which has the whole story, really. She's done it very well, I think.
Just a couple more questions. I can see you're getting tired.
No, I'm fine.
You're fine, okay. You mentioned her running to the street talking about the Swami. Now, this is an interesting story. Can you tell me what she told you about the Swami?
Only while she was in India. She never mentioned him in England. But the neighbours complained that she talked about the Swami, and the Swami was someone who I suppose she was in love with, she thought at the time. But how much she knew the Swami in India or not, because all that's wrapped in mystery, I find, this trip to India, which was before I knew her, and I don't know whether it was before or after the Lord Grey period.
Mm. Why do you think she was so well accepted in this circle when she moved?
I really don't know. She once said to me, afterwards everyone got very nasty and said she was an imposter. And she said to me once, why should I say I'm somebody I'm not when it only brings me unhappiness?
But amongst the society people of that particular circle, I mean, did they not question themselves and say, is this story really true?
I expect they took Lord Grey's word for it, but I don't know, and I don't think Susan would know. You say you've met, well, the Oregon people, of course, wouldn't know. It was only the Europeans, after she left Oregon, who would know how she was accepted. I think 1 or 2 people wondered a bit about her. I tell you who did. It was my friend Bishop Matthew, Archbishop David Matthew. And he thought she was, he used to shake his head and say Pondicherry. She was much better received by the Anglicans than by the Catholics, who were always rather suspicious, I think.
Yes. Did she ever mention Sir Oliver Lodge?
Not to my recollection.
No. There's some evidence that she was introduced to him.
Who said?
Sir Oliver Lodge. He was a man who investigated psychic phenomena.
Yes.
In the early part of the
But
century.
I don't think she was ever investigated, was she?
No, no, no.
You know, where you were at the funeral, there was a very nice person there called Carmen.
Blacker.
Yes.
Yes, I
And
met.
she's a Buddhist.
She hasn't told me that.
And she came to see me here many years ago, I think, when I first came here, just after my husband died, about 12 years ago. And she said, of course, I believe in reincarnation, and I think it may be a case of reincarnation.
Interesting. She had a history of being befriended by... You finished, huh? Sorry. Had a history of being befriended by people and then letting them down rather badly. Were you aware of this?
No. I think she had very few friends left by the time I became friendly with her. I know we took her to a restaurant for Christmas Day dinner in 1939, I think. Or she wouldn't have had a Christmas Day dinner. There seemed to be very few people she saw. And she got stranger and stranger.
What did you talk about, say, at dinner with her?
I suppose the war. The war was just on. I remember we had an extraordinary lunch party or dinner, and the other person was David Jones, you know, that very famous author and painter, and who was also rather dotty. I remember them in this restaurant in the Brumpton Road that we used to patronize a lot. But I had her to stay several times. We lived in a nice house in Berkshire. But she was never happy in the country. She only wanted to get back to her London life. After the bombing, the house next to hers was destroyed, and she rather enjoyed picking through the ruins and finding a dead cat and that sort of thing.
When she came to you, you'd hoped that she would talk to your children about natural history.
Yes, when she came at the beginning of the war, and that she'd go for walks with the children. There was a beautiful common nearby, full of flowers and birds, you know, and they'd come back squabbling like mad, and they loathed each other. It was she obviously didn't like children, and they didn't like her, in spite of her enormous understanding of animals and people in the book.
Did she talk about the country life at all when she was here, when she was in Berkshire?
Only about the country life of her childhood, telling me about the animals like the pig and the horse, and you know, Peter Paul Rubens and William Shakespeare the horse, and what other were they? I ought to try.
Well, the
man who was kind to mice. You remember?
Yes.
And the person she liked, that blind woman who was good to her. But I think she had a rotten time there, and that how she ever got there, of course, is very mysterious. She told me, believe it or not, that Clemenceau wanted her deported because she was a threat to the French nation if she was acknowledged as a legitimate Bourbon. And Clemenceau had a brother who was a lawyer in New York, and they arranged for her deportation and being planted on this family in Oregon. She told me that. How true is it? I don't know.
What's your final belief about her story?
My final belief is that she certainly was of French origin, that she may have been an illegitimate child of Prince Henry and an Indian woman. That Prince Henry wanted to get rid. I think he died, never even saw her, did he? He died in Saigon, more or less about the time of her birth. She would have told me that then the Vatican took over the responsibility, and that it would be through them that she got to America. But I don't know. I only know the kind of fantastic tales she told me.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Splendid.